Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Polyglot Software Development Podcast. Our guest today is Jirka Bachel. Jirka is the CEO of Navigara, and he's based out of the Czech Republic in beautiful Prague. We had a quick chat about a little bit about Prague and how I've been wanting to go there for years. So the quick introduction to Jirka. He leads the company that builds a platform using AI to evaluate the real world performance of software developers. Jirka has also built developer tools used by millions of people, including the sysnam.cz browser. Jirka, thanks for taking the time to chat with me today.
Hello.
I know I gave a quick introduction. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to our audience before we can just roll into the podcast, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm a builder in heart, and I enjoy that. And right now, we are building a tool which is measuring the performance of software developers in a new way. And the new way means that it works similarly to Cursor or Windsurf or other tools that are generating code. But we are not generating code. We are using the same techniques to evaluate the code which was written by software developer or AI.
Okay, perfect. I was just going to pull up give me a second, pull up your company page, right?
Oh, it's on vision.navigara.com.
Okay, so should I add a subdomain here? You said vision.
Yes. Yeah. Because we are giving the people an X-ray vision to an engineering team.
Oh, lovely. Okay. AI agents with X-ray vision for your engineering team. Yep. Let's talk about, it's early access, right? Awesome. We can talk about it as we go into the podcast. So the topic for today's podcast, again, it's loosely defined. I'd asked you, Jirka, before the call, and you mentioned that you want to talk about using what it means to use AI to measure software developer performance. I think it's an interesting topic, so we can get started there, and we'll see where it takes us. And we'll include the links to your website and your LinkedIn profile, so folks can certainly check that out. Okay, so let me stop sharing here for a second. Yep, and I think we can get straight into the topic. So, can you introduce us to what it means to using AI to measuring software developer performance?
What it means?
Yep, I mean, what it means. What I'm saying is, how has it been done in the past, and what are one or two things that make it seismically different from how it has been done in the past?
Yeah. You can measure software developers based on the amount of code they write. So the person who would change types in a project will be like the most like the biggest contributor to the code.
No, hang on. Let me interrupt you there. You said we measure software developer performance by the amount of code that you
can't do it like that.
Okay, I want to make sure, right?
Yeah.
So as long as I want to make sure, because we don't want to take a line of code and make it 20 lines of code and thereby Krish becomes a better performer, right? Okay, no, keep going. Yeah.
And also, like, really popular metrics for some reason is how long does it take to a company to merge a merge request or to accept merge request. Like, it's also a really weird metrics to measure. So we created a new way how to spot the real contribution of a person in a company. So you understand that the whole team is making like really huge impact and it's really helping to the company.
Okay, Jirka, I'm going to, interrupt you as you go, just to make sure I'm on the same page there. So what you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, measuring a software developer's performance by the number of lines or the amount of code they write, or how long they take to review a PR, you're saying is not the right way to do it, correct?
It's not the right way to do it, yeah.
Okay, and you're saying it's kind of been, you're saying it has been done that way in the past and by certain companies and certain teams on certain occasions, and you're saying those are not some of the good ways. But I want to ask, can we add some more ways that it has been done in the past that you do not agree with? You mentioned two of them. One is the amount of code that somebody writes. I agree. The other is, you said, how long it perhaps takes to sort of review a pull request, if you will. Understood. Anything else that you've seen in the past that you were like, you know what, this is not the right way to measure a performance of a developer?
Yeah, normally, there's like no cool metrics to do it. Like people were thinking about how to measure it, and they like always fail because one line of code per day could be really important and could be really hard work to create.
Right?
And it's the only way. That's basically how we created the idea. The only way how to truly understand how good or bad a developer is with, to ask to ask your coworkers who are working with you. Because if the developer is working with you like 1 year, or like, sorry, 6 months or 1 year, and he's doing your merge request, you can see his code, you know if he is good or bad.
Right? But
We are
Yurka,
using the same analogy
but let's say
because
let's say
we.
this, right? Let me take a very, a silly way, if you will, right? But a very
Okay.
simple way. Without any tools, you've asked me to implement a feature, right? One of the things
Yeah.
we do, like I mentioned to you before the call, is we have a web application which has project management features.
Yeah.
There's a number of project management features. One of them is a Kanban feature. Now, let's say you ask a team of developers. It's not a single developer effort necessarily, but just to keep things simple. You tell me, Krish, can you go implement Kanban? It's got to do these 5 things, whatever those 5 things are. And you give me a certain amount of time. I complete my work in that amount of time, write the tests that need to be written. I, do the due diligence. I deploy it. It sees the light of day going through the different environments. Let's take a very simple feature. One of the
Yeah.
features we have on our Kanban is a checklist where you can add a checklist item and say it's done, not done, assign that to
Mhm.
somebody, and yada, yada, yada. If you gave me that task, you gave me a time window to complete the task, and I completed that, and it works, and it sees the light of production, is that not a reasonable way to measure my performance without any tools? I just want to ask this,
Yeah.
play the devil's advocate and ask a
Yeah,
question, and then we'll continue.
it's a good question. Uh, yeah, normally the company would be happy with your work. But what if a different developer can do it twice that fast?
I think you read my mind there. That's the best answer and it's the correct answer, right? And I'll add
Yeah.
some more to it. And again, as we go through this call, it's going to be fun because I think we have similar backgrounds from a development standpoint. So whether we agree or disagree, the nice thing about talking to developers, fellow developers, is there's always learning at the end of the day. That's all that matters. So let's say your point is, hey, yeah, Krish got it done in the time window that I'd given him, but maybe I gave him too much time.
Mhm.
uh, and maybe forget time is one metric, right? There's other metrics. Maybe the way I implemented that is it works like college project, you know what I mean, where you're able
Yeah.
to add checklist items, you're able to assign.
Mhm.
So on paper I kind of got my job done, but when you dig deeper, and as they say, right, the devil is in the detail. Perhaps you don't like the design, perhaps you don't like the code, perhaps you don't like anything about that implementation. So just because something works may or may not be a good measure of somebody's performance. I mean,
Yeah.
fair. Would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Maybe part of the task was to create a test to test this feature. And you only created a test which is testing that there is a test. And that's it. But
Or the
you will
happy paths,
pass.
right? Yeah, not every permutation and combination of what needs to be
Yeah.
done,
Yeah.
which is a good point. But before we get into the actual topic, I want to sort of throw this out because people have sometimes differing opinions, and I want to sort of socialize that. That's not to
Yeah.
say that, I mean, everyone agrees that you want to implement something in the quickest possible time, at
Yeah.
the cheapest cost, with the least amount of risks, and deploy to production as soon as you can
Yeah.
so it can be consumed by n number of people and it's extremely scalable, right? All of this,
Yeah.
if it's there, it's great.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to come and tell us that, hey, I don't want one of this. That's the ideal scenario. But in the real
Yeah.
world, a lot of that depends on how much time you have, how much money you have to be able to spend on this, and what are the risks versus rewards. Meaning, is there value add in spending this much time and money on implementing? Someone told me years ago, Yerka, that if you have an infinite amount of time and money, everybody will be a fantastic developer. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
No
Yeah,
questions asked.
yeah.
What separates a good developer perhaps from a not so good one? One of the differences might be the reality of the world, which is that we don't have all the money and all the time. So, with those constraints in place, you still have to perform and be better than somebody else.
Yeah. And I don't think there is like a perfect developer. There is like a perfect developer for specific company and at specific stage. You know,
Which is very,
for
very
example,
true.
yeah, for example, in Navigara, we are not as focused on documentation and testing yet because we don't have to be. We are more focused towards how to quickly test this or how to quickly build this feature. If it works, we can create the documentation or tests later on. That's fine for us in our stage. But Microsoft can do that like that.
Absolutely, right? So, in other words, the phase of the company matters, absolutely matters.
Mhm.
But even at Microsoft, I used to work for Oracle in one of my first jobs years ago,
Yeah,
large company, large teams. And since then, I worked for small companies before we launched our own startup. But the reason I give that example is there could be occasions, even in large companies, and tell me if you agree, where it's not going to go to production before it goes through all of those checks and balances. Like Apple's not going to necessarily, hopefully, release a feature. Sometimes they do because they promised AI features like 12 months ago, and people are waiting with their iPhones today, and we still don't see a lot of the AI features. But that apart, you know, I'm saying even large companies might have lots of checks and balances before a feature actually goes to production or even to beta or alpha or whatnot. But when you socialize that within the context of the boundaries or realm of your own team, perhaps those checks and balances are not going to be there. You know what I mean? So it's not just the faces of where a company is. All that I'm trying to say is even in a large company, there could be phases of a project where the measure of
yeah,
of a
yeah,
developer could actually
yeah,
vary. In other words, you judge
yeah.
Jirka and Krish differently during the prototyping phase of a project, but you might have to assess the two of us very differently when we are actually in production. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Yeah, yeah, I understand. I agree. That's why we are allowing the companies to set the measurement by themselves. So you can, on one project, focus more towards speed and not as much towards code quality or documentation or testing. It's up to you. You're allowing the companies to set the metrics or how the performance is measured by themselves.
This is very interesting. So let's go into your product in a second. But before we do that, I asked you some of the not so good ways of measuring developer performance, and we talked about a few things here.
Yeah.
Before we go into your particular offering in the product, Jirka, at the higher level, and maybe some of these features are implemented by your product at this point, maybe not, maybe they're in the future, coming in the future. Doesn't matter. Outside of your product, what are some of the good ways that you think we should measure developer performance?
Maybe I will broaden it slightly up. There's a big difference between developers in Europe and USA. And the biggest difference is not in the code, is how you present your work, basically. And the people from US are really good at showcasing their skills. And we are really bad at it. So two developers, one from US and one from Czech Republic, for example, if they are measured just what they are saying on the stand-up, it could end up that the developer from US is much better compared to the one in Czech Republic. But when you actually check the code they created, it could be completely different.
You know, I'm smiling because you said it beautifully and in a very soft manner. But the way I'm interpreting that, and correct me if I'm wrong, it comes across to me like Krish, there's a lot of fluff with you guys in the US and we don't have. Is that what it is? Is that euphemisms, Yerka? But that's what you're saying?
No, yeah, I know what. I'm not sure if it's bad. You're just selling your work. And I think it's right to do it correctly. But we are just bad at selling our skills.
And what that's actually very interesting you mentioned that. Let's dig a little bit deeper. This is
Okay.
getting interesting. What are some of the reasons you think that that is the case? I mean, is there a cultural difference? And again, there's a few things. I'm going to throw some out here
Yeah.
and tell me what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Now, if you took a team in the US, at least my experience, right? That's I'm not speaking to the larger population, but I've done this for over 20 years, so hopefully I'm not completely wrong and off the mark here. The
Hmm.
teams, I mean, we are a very diverse country, right? When you have a typical team in the US, you have somebody from, somebody who was born and raised in another part of the world, maybe from China, maybe from India. There are folks who live in Europe or probably were born in Europe, they moved here. And then you have folks who are born and raised in the country, in the US.
Yeah.
So a typical team has a lot of cultural differences. And what I mean by that also is not all of us, so English is certainly not the native tongue for not most, for everybody in the team. It's a collective bag. Somebody, either was raised here, somebody was born someplace else, and actually lives here. Those contribute to sort of the team dynamics. I'm just throwing that out.
Hmm.
I want to ask you, in my experience again, I've actually worked with, developers in Prague. Absolutely brilliant developers. You know what I mean? Like absolutely brilliant developers. But I've not been to Prague. Like I told you, I've been meaning to go there or
Yeah.
been or work there. So you can tell me if it's true. But the team composition is very different. Like at least in my experience, when I worked with somebody who was in Prague, the team was in Prague. Almost everybody in that team that I worked with, at least, was born and raised in either Prague or some other part of the Czech Republic. In other words, I could,
Yeah.
at least in the team that I worked with
Yeah.
two teams. I didn't know of anybody else who had come from other parts of the world to work. First of all, is that true or is that just my experience with that one team?
Yeah, the Czechs. I think mostly people, like general people in Europe, are not moving a lot. We're just born on one place, move slightly a little bit, few kilometers, and we just stay there. Uh,
And that's a blessing. I will tell you, as somebody who's moved 10,000 miles, living being able to live where you were born and raised, the same schools you went to. I have friends who do that. That's a different feeling altogether. I mean, I love America, but that being said, there's a big difference between being raised and continuing to live where you're born. So I get that. But so which means, do you agree with my statement, which is the team is a little bit more, it's folks from the same part of the world, right?
yeah, yeah, and the dynamics is completely different. And I still think like the main difference is in the schools. People in US are more focused in the school on presentation. You're practicing that a lot. We are not. We are more fact-based school. We have more fact-based schools.
You know what? Let's talk more. Well, it's very interesting. This is a subjective area. So folks are watching this or listening to us, please take this as Jirka and Krish's opinions. We are not trying to
Yeah,
represent larger communities because this is a very subjective topic. Even though we are two developers having this conversation, this particular topic is very subjective. So I can see a lot of differing opinions. So back to what you're saying, because it is important. It gives us context to the product we're going to talk about, right? Measuring and the
yeah,
item which is
yeah,
measuring developer performance.
yeah.
Because I think important that actually it's interesting, and I'm happy that you mentioned this, Yirka, because when you talk measurement of performance, sometimes we tend to make it very quantitative and just quantitative. But I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a qualitative element to it because you're not measuring a bot's performance. You're measuring a human performance. So how Krish
Yeah,
performs on any given day or any given week
yeah,
is not just a direct reflection of my skills. It's also a function of my mood that week, what else is happening in life that week, the macro and the micro economic conditions. A number of different things play a factor. So, a performance of a developer, when we go to the product, I'll ask you this because there's subjective elements and quantitative elements, objective elements as well, right? So, we can
yeah.
sort of dissect it and see how it goes. But this is why I think I'm happy you brought this up. Now, when you say folks in the US, the teams are able to sort of present better, you're talking about, are you mainly talking about like presentations and sprint meetings and things of that nature, or was
Yeah.
it someplace else?
Yeah, the presentation meetings and what you are saying on stand-ups. For Czech developer, that's not important, because he thinks the code should talk for him.
Correct.
But the manager don't understand the code. So
Okay, so this
he's
let's talk about that. The first question I have is, you mentioned, let's dig a little bit deeper.
yeah,
What is your native language in the Czech Republic, Jirka?
like it's like we have like secret language called Czech language. So yeah, only
So
10
Czech.
million people speak the language. So
Okay, so but that is the main predominant language. Like if you go to
yes,
Prague, is that what people are talking to each other, right?
yeah, yeah,
And let's talk about, say, English. English is a second, it's for me too, right? English is not my native language. But I presume because everybody I worked with in Prague, they had no problems speaking English, which means it's also something I figure you guys learn, you folks learn in school, I take it, right?
yeah. We learned that, but I thought it would be more common to speak in Czech Republic English. Like compared to Holland or Germany, we are still behind.
Okay, so when you talk about presentation, I just want to get to the actual bottom of it to the extent possible. Is there a language issue here? In other words, that's not the issue.
No,
So you have
no,
that's not the
no,
problem, right?
no,
So
no,
it's
no.
it's different from the language itself. If you have to pin it down to one or two things, what would be an example? I mean, even you can manufacture this example and it'll be quite interesting. Let's say you play the role of two people, Yerka, who's like a Czech developer, and Yerka, who's like a US developer. And how might you be presenting the same thing? If you can think of an example, that'd be quite nice, actually.
Yeah, no problem. Like as a Czech developer, after I finish like a task, you mentioned like something on your application. It was
Checklist, right?
what
Checklist, implementing
checklist.
check.
So as a Czech developer, I would say something like, okay, I'm finishing the task. I have still few bugs there, and I notice it's not working correctly, and I have to improve the code and also do something with I don't know what. But basically, I would focus on issues.
Okay.
Most of the time, I would focus what is not working in there, and then I would stop. As a US developer, I would focus towards positive. So yesterday, I implemented this feature which allowed the customer to select the task he is working on. So not just that, he can also delete the item and move the item higher or lower. It's amazing.
Okay. I
You
think
can clearly see like the
no, you
difference.
can different. I'm actually going to visually showcase the difference. You know what I mean? Give
Yeah,
me a second because it's important to
yeah,
understand. And folks, this is amazing. Every conversation I truly appreciate it. And again, Erica, I would thank you at the end of the podcast. But the reason we keep the podcast, the topic fluid is because as you start talking, you can tell that there's more things we sometimes want to talk about than sort of blocking, having these boundaries and walls about a topic essentially, or so to speak. So, uh, just humor me till for a few minutes till we get to the actual topic in itself. Yeah. And
yeah.
by the way, do a quick time check. This is amazing. So I can keep talking. I know that it's typically an hour. Do you have a if you have a hard stop at some point, Yerka, just tell me here and we can wrap it up within the 5 minutes,
No.
right? Yep.
I'm having fun. It's almost a midnight in Czech Republic, but I'm fine.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So you're okay, right? So
No, no
we can
problem,
check.
no
Yeah.
problem, no
I'm very
problem.
nocturnal. So if you want me to catch me at the most productive time, I would love to meet at that time for me actually on the East Coast. But let's
Yeah,
keep going. And I'm going to do a screen share here, just
yeah,
so I'm going to just restate everything that Yerka just said, but just in my own words, if you will. So what Yerka is saying is, let's say we both implemented this feature. I'm just going to one of the features I mentioned, like checklist. But let's say I'm going to pick Kanban, for instance, right? This is what I mentioned. Am I sharing my screen? I am, correct? Yep. Okay. So you see my screen, right, Irka?
yeah, yeah,
So what you're saying is that, let's say this is my task. Krish was given a task to implement a Kanban feature, and I came to the sprint. And let's say all I had to do was drop a bunch of these icons here for these actions. Now, what we are saying is the difference in presentation when you come to these sprint meetings and demo is how do you present this? Like in one simple case, you're saying the Czech developer might say, you know what, folks, I worked on adding view, relations, linking, ACL, copy, move, all of these actions on a particular card and on Kanban. I worked on it the last week or two. The UI icons are in place. We've made all of the UI changes. The backend work is in progress, and we should be done mostly, right? That's
Yeah.
one way to put it. Now, if I, for lack of a better word, if I dramatize this, as somebody like just to call it for your example, there is like I come to the same meeting and it's the exact same feature, but now I present it differently. And tell me if this makes sense in terms of what you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking. Uh, hey, folks, I was working on implementing one of the Kanban features the last couple of weeks. As you know, we've been able to do this outside of the Kanban, but we've added these action buttons on Kanban, and now you can actually view not just on the outside of a Kanban view, but you're able to do it in the Kanban view as well. You can sort of connect these cards together. You can link and unlink cards from one another. We've implemented the access control as well. And our backend API, the endpoints are mostly complete, but we're still working with the backend team. This was kind of very, it was more complicated than we had anticipated for this to be. But we ran into a bunch of issues along the way, but we were able to sort of work through that and get it working just before we could present it to you. At this point, it's completely implemented. It's been tested. We've shown it to the business. They seem to like the feature, and we are close to sort of deploying this, and we are able to do a demo for the demo. I don't know if I said anything different there, Irkar. Is there anything more that you would expect from a slightly improved presentation, just to call out for the difference between the two?
Yeah. No, I think it was clear how you explained this, and um,
But the reason I
it's
ask is, to me as a developer, even though the second one was a little more verbose, both of them conveyed the message to me. You
yeah,
know what I mean? That made
yeah,
no difference. So
yeah.
my question to you is, why does it matter how the present? Now, my example may have been rather poor here. I take it, but I give that. But why does it matter when you're presenting this in a sprint meeting? Why does this presentation matter? Who cares? In other words, who cares is my question.
You're selling your work. That's what you should do. And when you are thinking that it's not important to do this, you're missing an opportunity to showcase your skills to others. And sometimes, like I know people who are working 12 hours per day to make these things work, and on the stand-up they just say few sentences, and they look exactly the same as other junior developer who just finished to-do list. And
Wow, I see what you mean. You're saying, in other words, the two of us go to a meeting. You implemented let's say you implemented 10 endpoints in an API, as an API
yeah,
company. And all
yeah,
I did was made progress in one of the endpoints. And I spoke about it for 5 minutes and you spoke
yeah,
20 words.
yeah,
Brevity may or may not help the cause here, is what you're saying.
yeah, yeah. And also, you know what's my favorite technique? Is creating imaginary problems. As a senior developer, I saw everything. It's not a lot of things that which I'm uncomfortable to do or I struggle to do. So I'm not talking about huge problems normally because I know how to figure them out. But if I want to showcase my skills, I will at first showcase the huge problem we are in front of, and that I need to spend 1 week figuring out how to figure this out. And then I need 1 month to figure the huge problem out. That what junior developer could say. And everybody would be like, okay, to give him 1 month to figure the huge problem. Which, like a senior developer, I would just go to the meeting. Oh, I did that. You should do this. Tomorrow it will be done.
Okay, so so let me ask you this. So the problem we established, that the problem you're saying here is, hey, uh, culturally, or for a number of reasons, people present the work they've done quite differently, and that makes a difference to how it's being perceived.
Yeah.
Now, yes, I agree. On the other side, whose problem is it? In other words, if you're presenting something to me like not to me, like the two of us are presenting a feature that we implemented to, say, the same person, the client. And if the client is not able to appreciate or tell the difference between the amount of work that you've put in and created, you've solved a much more complex problem than what Krish has done.
Yeah.
Is it our, I mean, before we get to how we should solve this, Jirka, at the ground level, is it our problem or is it the client just not being aware of what they should be? I mean, our is the point that, hey, the client may not be aware and it's not their job, it's our job to make them aware of it.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 You're not selling your work correctly if the client don't understand.
Okay, so that it, I can see that making a difference in a consulting engagement where you're actually working with a large organization. Maybe you're working with, like, I don't know, say some large company in the US, for instance, right? Some
Yeah.
multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah.
They have lots of teams, plenty of
Yeah.
money, and they have multiple vendors who are building this for them. And they have to be able to make a judgment between, hey, is Krish's team doing a better job than Yirka, or vice versa. But if you're a product team building products, how does it matter?
Yeah, that's funny. Like when the team is bigger, I think that's the reason why the Czech developers are not concerned about showcasing their skills, because they think that other developers will understand what they did, because they understand the stuff they did, the merge request, and they're thinking that they are doing the talk, the stand up for other developers in the team who understands the difference between junior and senior developer. But if you are not a technical person, you can tell the difference. And the developers, in their heart, are team workers normally. So you can see like the clearest in when you are doing sprint and you are evaluating how long the task should take. Everybody is like, okay, so it should be 5 man days. Nobody is challenging that. It's not happening often if you challenge how long the task should take.
Okay, so no, my question, Eka, going back to it is, if you're in a consulting engagement where you have a client, then the presentation becomes a little bit more important. My question is, if you're in a product team working to build a product
The
and you have a few
same.
teams, how does presentation make a difference?
It's the same. It's the same as with the client.
It is, I mean, why is it the same? Because your manager is likely a technical person too in a product startup. So they would be able to appreciate, right?
Could be, it could be or not. It's just you have to sell your work. If you're not doing that, you're missing the opportunity.
You're missing the,
Because
okay, I think, let's say that that's
yeah,
fair enough. Now
yeah,
let's jump into your product. I'm going to do a screen share here and tell us which of the problems that we've talked about, what does your product, the Vision AI Navigara product, what does it focus on solving?
yeah. Uh, like we are
Now
trying
is the
to
time for
showcase
you.
that.
I was going to
Yeah,
interrupt you. Sorry for a second. I was just going to say this is going to be Yurka as a non-Czech developer trying to present this, right? Not as a Czech developer, because
I'm
Yurka will be like, yep, you should see what it does. I don't have to explain anything to you, right? No, you're going to have to explain it to us here.
I'm not a typical Czech developer.
Okay.
uh, so what you're trying to figure out is how to spot the hidden gems in your company. Because maybe I can give you like one more bad example. I
Okay.
know about the companies which in 3 or 4 days I can finish my monthly, like in 3 or 4 days. If I'm only working like 3 or 4 days, everybody is fine in the company
No, Yurka, sorry,
because I
say that
can.
again. No, what does that mean? Can you say that again?
Yeah. Imagine like you have like sprint, like 2 sprints meeting per month, and because nobody is challenging uh, your, I forget the word for it. When you are nobody is challenging how long the task should take.
Okay.
So you say whatever you want, and you can finish your sprint in 2 days, and the next sprint again in 2 days, and everybody's fine, everybody is happy, and you can do whatever you want for the rest of the month.
Okay, so what you're saying is, tell me if I understood correctly. What you're saying is, if your sprint is 2 weeks long, typically, you're
Yeah,
saying I'm able to complete everything that's been assigned to me in only 2 days,
yeah,
within 2 days. So the other 8 days of that sprint, I almost have nothing to do.
yeah. Imagine with Cursor, there's never been a bigger difference between performance of developers than right now. Like with Cursor, I can implement this feature in minutes. Just yesterday, somebody was telling me, "Oh, Jirka, you forgetting password on your page," and I just write to Cursor, create a page with forgotten password and use Firebase for this. And it was done in like 30 seconds, and I deployed in next minute. And normally, if I tell you it will take 3 days, you'll be fine with that.
Correct. Okay. So, which means the way we're going to build software has to change. And I have mentioned this in a couple of podcasts prior to this, saying when we go to build something new in our company, Yerka, when we go do it the same way like we've done it last year or 6 months ago, it bothers me and bothers us because we're like, you know what? Even if we feel like we're doing it the right way, if it is like how we've done it in the past, it gives us it's cause for concern because we know things are changing rapidly. So the way you approach software development has to be quite different, right? That
Yeah,
no
yeah.
questions about that. So okay, back to what you're trying to say there, right? Go to you
So,
mentioned other ways to other problems, but back to your product here.
so there's never been a bigger difference between developers than right now because somebody is using these AI tools and someone is not using them. Some companies are banning them to use, and some people are using them without telling the company. So it's a huge difference in the performance of a developer. And the way how we do it is that we are allowing the companies to set their own metrics. So, for example, our default metrics are code quality, code clarity, algorithmization, documentation, testing, security, and much more. And it's our private beta is like full right now because you are showcasing like their landing page. The tool is actually working in a lot of in lots of companies, but we are not ready to public testing because most of our software is run on private clouds,
Okay.
not on public ones, because
Okay,
of security. Yeah, so
that
okay, I will continue. So we are measuring a lot of metrics like that. And if some company wants to add more metrics, they can. So for example, really my favorite one is the developer over-engineering the code he's creating?
okay.
Because sometimes it's really hard to do things easily. It's really easy to over-engineer them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think was it Albert Einstein's quote, if I'm not wrong, that it's extremely complex to make things simple. I couldn't
Yeah,
agree more. Right?
yeah,
I could not
yeah,
agree more. So your point again, there is the question is the let's say we take the metric. And what you're saying there is, I want to be able to tell if a developer is over engineering the problem that they're solving.
yeah,
That's a very important statement.
yeah.
Can you take an example, Yerka, and sort of walk us through how they could have potentially over engineered it and how, by virtue of using your platform, we can actually prevent them from doing something like that?
Yeah, it's like we are basically replicating what would senior developer do if he saw a code from junior developer who is creating to-do list and it needs like thousands of lines of code to do it. You would quickly explain to him that this is wrong approach.
But hang on, I'm going to challenge you there. Let's say there's thousands of lines for a to do, right? On
Yeah,
on the surface, it seems like there's too much code for what it's doing. But let's say I did not write most of that code and I generated that code. And the code generators, as you know, are always more verbose. They're not sussing from what I've seen.
Yeah.
They generated thousands of lines of code. So to me, the argument is what do I care? I generated this code. It was not 20 lines of code, it's 2000 lines
Yeah.
of code, but it's not code that
Yeah.
I wrote. It was generated. So to me, I don't see a problem with it being that many lines of code.
Yeah. It's not a problem with one commit. Maybe with two, maybe with 10. But after 100, you start to struggle. Because when there is a bug in there, like, I think, like, from what you're saying, you already use these cursors or windsurf and other tools. And I also created an app that has like 99% code generated by these tools. But it's okay with easy tools. When there is something like more complicated and there's suddenly a weird bug and you need to fix it, oh man,
I think
that's
that's a great point you make there, right? In other words, outside of code being generated, I think there's what we're talking is a much broader topic. Much broader topic. I feel like we're skimming the surface, and it's very interesting to me
yeah.
personally. You mentioned, okay, if the code is generated, my point was, how does it matter if there's too many lines of code? And your response is, if it's just one feature with too many lines of code, it's all right. But cumulatively, it can become a problem. Let's make it a little bit more specific there. Sorry, go ahead.
It will create a huge technical debt basically in there.
Right. Let me clarify what I'm saying there and make it a little bit more specific
Yeah.
here. Let's say we have a code base, a repository with generated code, a combination of generated code and human written code, right? But that
Mhm.
human written code could be code that's entirely written by a human or assisted by AI tools, but regardless, it's going passing through the human before it sees the light of day, and it's committed and pushed essentially. So two parts, just two separations. One is a bunch of generated code and code that's written by us and not generated. And typically in any repo, regardless of the language, we separate the direct those pieces of code, right? In other words, we have a directory that has all of the generated code, and we have a different set of directories that has code that's not generated. So it's completely different from one is from different from the other. So the volume of code that's in the generated directory, Yerka, to me personally, it wouldn't bother me, because you know what? I know each and every line of the code was generated. So if the tool ended up spitting out 2000 lines of code instead of 200 lines of code, it's all right. But the code that is not generated is where the problem is. I mean, would you agree, or am I missing something there in my summary?
Like, imagine doing a code review for 2,000 lines.
But why would I review code that's, in other words, there is no code review for generated code though?
Yeah, I think that's an issue. Because what if there is a security breach in there? You know, for example, Cursor likes to put these keys whenever he wants.
Correct, but if I use the tool to generate the code, I'm most certainly going to be using a different tool to review the generated code. I mean, I'm not thinking that there's going to be code that's generated by a bot or a machine or a script,
Yeah.
but a human actually reviews that code. That's not a typical combination, isn't it? Right? If the code generated, you use a tool to review the code, but if a human wrote the code, then it can either be reviewed by a bot or it can be reviewed by a human. But I think we both agree at the crux
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
problem, which is you're saying whether the code is generated or otherwise, there needs to be a way to validate the quality of that code before it's pushed. And your point earlier was over engineering is a problem, which all of
Mm-hmm.
us, right? I mean, it happens
Yeah.
all the time, and I've personally probably guilty of doing that many times too, because sometimes a similar problem in a different scenario, you ended up solving it in a certain way, and now we have a problem that sort of looks similar, but the scenario is different. Now you take the learnings from the previous situation and apply it here, and it ends up making it overcomplicated, and you ended up over engineering it inadvertently. Your intent was not to over engineer it, but it ended up being that way.
Yeah.
So how, uh, if there is an example that you can take, that'll be great. Even if not, how does your platform help the detection of that over engineering? I mean, at what stage does it identify that something is being over engineered, and how does it address that?
Yeah. After each commit or pull request or merge request.
No, but
So
what does it do? I mean, what is over engineering and more technical? Like, if you is there an example where you
Yeah,
could take where this is over engineering and this is the unover engineered version of this?
I'm thinking about a story how to explain it, and without showing the code, I don't
I
know
know it's
how.
probably going to be difficult, right? But let's say, but let's tell me, even without the code, Yerka, what are some aspects of over engineering that you noticed? I mean,
Yeah,
what was particularly over engineered there?
like the typical ones is B2B tools, which are like quickly growing, and because they have so many customers, they're trying to implement more and more and more features, and the managers are pushing it really hard. So the developers are not creating reusable components and creating like a new for every page or every setting, and it ends up being unmaintainable. So
Okay,
basically, they
so
are creating technical debt. That
okay, so I'm going to say, tell me if this is right. Let's remove the word over engineering because all of what you said makes complete sense, except that it may or may not be over engineering, right? Because not being able to use a component, right? In other words, re-implementing a component and not using an existing component is a problem, but that's not necessarily over engineering, if you know what I mean. So let's say we
yeah,
ignore over engineering. Let's say typical problems associated with development. I built something, I'm not able to reuse it, or I built something way too generically. This is something you might have noticed too.
yeah,
Sometimes, I've done this myself and I've seen other people do it, where you try to make a component a little bit more generic than it needs to be. In other words, you're trying to solve world hunger, where your job was only to appease the satiate the appetite of three people. In other words, that's over engineering, right? You build something that can scale stand the test of time for 10 years, but all that you needed to actually do is get this thing out the door, and it worked for 6 months before something else came and replaced it essentially. Now,
yeah. And,
go ahead.
and basically, what we are doing is that we're creating a platform that with every commit or pull request, you can ask the code questions and measure the response.
Okay, and how does it integrate? So let's go into the details a little bit. Let's say I have a
Yeah,
repository. One of our
yeah,
APIs is built using on Golang, right? It's one of
yeah,
my favorite languages. It's used built.
yeah,
Not all of our repos are on Golang, but some are on Golang. Let's say I have a new API that I'm working on that is also using that's built on Golang. What are some of the things I can do using a tool that will help me do this? I'm going to implement a new API, and let's say we can make whatever assumptions we need to make. How is the I create this repo on GitHub, and how do I connect that to, how do I point it to your system? In other words, if you can walk us through an experience of a developer, like let's say I'm using VS Code, I'm writing Golang code. How do I use this platform?
yeah. Like basically, you give us an access to your GitLab or GitHub repository, and that's it. After like 24 hours, which is normally taking us to understand the project, because we are going through every file, every line of code, creating like metadata about everything, and then creating a vector database from your project. Basically, the same way how Cursor or Windsurf is doing that. So basically, we are doing RAG, and then with every commit, we are using the RAG to understand the code. But not just that we started with this, but then we realized that some of these old techniques are also useful to use. Like basically what Sonar is doing, it's useful to use too, because sometimes when you're thinking, I can give you an example with out services. Like if you are doing some changes with registration or login, it can impact the whole application, and create one line of code there could be really like difficult job to do. And because we know that this file is used everywhere in the application, we are okay if you just change one line, and we can say that this is work like proper work for one day, because we have all this information stored in the vector database.
Okay, but let's dig a little bit deeper just so I understand this. Let's say I have a repo on GitHub. It's
Yeah,
committed to GitHub. Now I give access, just like I use some IDs where you have to give access to your repos on GitHub so
yeah,
they can read your source code off of there. Now,
Yeah.
if you give access to your platform, you mentioned after 24 hours, it does some analysis. I'm going to make some assumptions here. Some of them might be correct, some of them may be wrong.
Yeah.
Correct me as I go. Some, hopefully, they're not entirely wrong. You mentioned RAG, like retrieval augmented generation as well, which means you're taking this code and you're running it, I'm presuming, through some LLM essentially that's doing this
Yeah.
code analysis.
Yeah. 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 We're mostly using the Gemini 2.5 because the context window with 1 million tokens is really cool.
Okay.
Uh,
Sure. So you use
yeah.
this.
Yeah. And the main reason why it's taking so long is because we are doing this 1 year back. So basically, after first day, you will get the stats 1 year, like the history of 1 year.
Up until the year. Okay.
So you will like see like really cool reports about the performance of all your teams, and you can benchmark them with others.
So in other words, I give you a repo, and let's say this repo was the contributors. Let's presume there were two contributors to this repo, Jirka and Krish.
Yeah.
After the day's worth, you're going to go up to 12 months prior to the date where you start, and you're going to do some analysis of that code. And is it going to, like, is there a visual that we can look at? It does it give you a summary of this is what Jirka has contributed, this is what he implemented in the last 6 to 12 months, here are the good things, the not so good things, and the bad things? And is that how it sort of breaks it down?
Yeah, it will tell you like the performance, the languages you are using, how senior you are with every skills you used in the project, the role in every project you are working on. If you are like maintainer or bug fixer, or you are creating a new architecture changes there, or if you, whatever the LLM thinks about you, basically. Um,
And then you said you
and
store this in a vector database, and just I want to understand from a security standpoint. Let's say I have a
yeah,
repo.
yeah,
uh, I'm not even worried about a large company. I'm just being selfish, thinking
yeah,
about us as a
yeah,
startup. We have some repos, a bunch of repos, and
yeah,
as a software company that doesn't have any hardware, all of your IP, like, is your software. You know what I mean?
yeah,
There's nothing
yeah,
else that we have because we don't have
yeah,
hardware. So we are all pretty close to our code, if you will, right? We
yeah,
want to protect it as much as we can. So when it lives in this vector database, Yirka, where does it live? Does it live in the Navigara space, or is it a vector database that's created by the client like Snowpal? So your analysis that's living in a vector database is living in our virtual private cloud in some, I don't know whether it's Amazon, someplace else, doesn't matter. How does that work?
yeah. Yeah, like the privacy and security is like a huge topic for us. And normally we are used with companies with over 50 developers. Uh, so we are doing custom installations to their private clouds.
Okay, so which
So
means perfect. Which means when you talk about you storing some data or your analysis in a vector database, that happens to live within their private cloud.
yes, exactly. So
That make
that's
that
why we
makes
use Gemini, and everything is in Google Cloud. And we just
make
install you the softwares there, and
I think
you
that
will
makes
see the
sense.
result.
I
Yeah.
asked this because a lot of people are going to have this question, so I figured I'll just ask the question.
Yeah.
And then, what vector database do you guys use?
Oh, that was a huge topic for this. Uh, like basically, we was like, because we are combining like the vector search with other stuff. Most of the cool stuff is done by us. So we are storing the vector in what's the name for this in Google Cloud? In I think it's a Cloud SQL, because it
Okay.
allows us to do the vector search too, because Google has also like several ways how to store vectors, but we were not happy with their pricing. It was too expensive for nothing, we thought. And when we were trying, we came up with similar results, because we are not as focused on speed. Because most of the Google Cloud vector database are focused towards speed. You're paying a lot of money because it's quicker. But we don't care about speed, because if it takes us like 1 minute or 30 seconds to do one commit,
Yeah, it
it's no
doesn't matter.
difference.
Makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay.
So we are using this, but most of the part, but because I think like the most the coolest stuff in our solution is not with the vector search, is what data we store there and how.
Okay.
Because the pre-processing part of every file is really important in order to understand the project.
And then in your case, when you say that, one thing I want to understand is there's two parts to this. One is you mentioned measuring developer performance. Is the crux of what you're trying to achieve here, is that trying to tell the difference between the value add brought by each of the developers in the team, or is your intent trying to improve the code base in general, agnostic to the developers? Tell me if the question's not clear. I can repeat that. All that I'm trying to ask here is there's two parts to the problem. I want to see where your focus is on.
Yeah, like we want to improve the team, basically create like a self-healing process so the team can increase like the performance. But right now, the tool is only used to measure. We are trying to measure everything as precise as possible. And when we will be happy with this, we'll be like in next month, I think we are still have few minor issues we have to figure out. We will be implementing the ways how to increase the performance and what to focus on to look better and give bigger impact to the company.
Okay. And then you mentioned a few tools that were a little bit similar, just so people know as they look you up and try to understand your value add specifically. So, what in your mind, what do you think are some of your unique selling propositions? Like, what makes you stand out from someone else who's doing something perhaps similar?
We never saw anyone to use RAG for evaluating code for every commit in a history, like with the history, because normally when you are trying to evaluate a code with single commit, there could be some small mistakes in the solution. But when you do it on hundreds, on thousands of commits, you have so many data points that it looks really clear the difference between a junior or senior, or how you improve at a time, how long does it take to onboard a new developer on specific project. And we never saw these metrics in any solution we used.
Okay.
Because it was not possible to do 6 months ago.
Right. And then the thing I want to ask you is I see a bit of an irony, but maybe it's just me who sees that. Uh, let's say we did not have AI tools that helped us write code, generate code, and so on and
Yeah,
so forth. Let's imagine a world like maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I don't
yeah,
know, where pretty much most of the code that was written, I
yeah,
mean, we've had generated code for a while. I mean, I'm outside of that, at least, let's say a lot of the code was written by
yeah,
humans. Then you needed a tool to be able to tell the quality of code written by each of the members in a team and to be able to tell the difference in their contributions, and need a tool for measuring their performance. Makes sense. But now that you mentioned, there was an example where in 30 seconds you were able to create a piece
yeah,
of code where the forgot
yeah,
password was missing. You were able to implement
yeah,
that, test it, deploy it, and
yeah,
then within a minute it was done. That's not an anomaly. As we look into the
yeah,
future, it sounds like that's what's going to be the case, because
yeah,
I think Mark Zuckerberg had asked Satya Nadella a question probably a couple of weeks ago, if I remember correctly, as to how much of the code at Microsoft was created by AI. And I think Satya Nadella's answer was, I'm paraphrasing what he said. He said about 25 to 30% of the code at Microsoft,
yeah,
like one of the largest software companies out there, was actually created by AI.
yeah,
Uh, and then follow that up with the news I saw today where Microsoft is going to lay off thousands of people or hundreds of engineers. I mean, if you do the math, it adds up. More code is written by AI, fewer people are needed to write the code. In a world where more and more code is going to be written by bots,
yeah.
Jirka, is there value in being able to analyze the quality of the performance because it's machines writing it? What are we analyzing?
Yeah, like right now we're focusing on performance because we think like right now this is like a huge issue in the teams, and if the future will be that most of the code will be written by AI, we'll be focusing more towards security. Because how can you trust that? I think like a new positions will be made, which will be called builder, which is something like a person who don't understand the code or the technology will be creating just prompts and creating working apps. But how can you trust that the person won't leak any private information from your company? So we'll be more focusing towards security of an AI generated code.
Makes sense. Now, in your experience, right now, again, you live in a different part of the world. How has this is a question slightly different from what we've been talking about so far? As a developer, at least I always say this. I see three categories of developers, if you will. At least this is the way I see it. Folks have been doing this for like 4 decades or 5 decades, and who are incredibly experienced, but also at the tail end of their career, if you will. Maybe they're close to retirement. They are excited, probably they're curious about what's happening, but not necessarily worried or anxious because they may or may not be impacted by this because they are probably looking at retirement soon enough. And there's a first category of people in mind, the way I see it, are the Gen Z folks or the millennials and whatnot, uh, who are starting to enter the workforce. They have not written code any other way. They've not built software any other way. And this is the first time they're starting to do this, working on real life apps that are going to see the light of day in production, not like college projects. They can learn it using Cursor, number of tools that you mentioned here. They learn it the way you're supposed to be building software in 2025 and beyond. So they are learning it, quote unquote, the right way for what needs to be done today. And then there's this third category of people. I see me in that bucket, which is folks who are hopefully many decades away from retirement, but also a couple of decades into their career, meaning they're not starting today. So we have a fair bit of unlearning to do and then relearning because you're going to have to build software very differently from how you've been building software over the years. So AI has an impact, in my opinion, on all three categories of these people, but the impact that it has is going to be very different depending on where you sort of belong. I want to get your thoughts on it. That's just the way I
Yeah,
wrote this
yeah,
down.
yeah,
How do you see it? How do you see software development changing uh, in the near and to short term?
yeah. Like as I mentioned, I think like a new position will be made called builder, which is a person who just don't understand C++, Golang, or JavaScript, and just using cursor and the thing works. And because he will be probably really cheap to hire, um, and it will work. The company will benefit from this. So I think like this is something that what Gen Z will be doing right now. And I think if you are not experienced developer and you do want to understand like the hardcore stuff, it's not a bad idea to try it. But when the things stop working and after 10 prompts, the cursor won't be able to fix it, you will probably need to ask somebody who understands the code to fix it. And right now, my biggest issue with these kind of developers is how you become a programmer which actually understand the code.
I
Because
think
to me, to be a programmer, it's not that difficult to understand JavaScript or any other language. But the amount of other small stuff you have to understand in order to make everything works, it takes years to master.
I think you make an incredible point there, and I want to stress that and add to it. Sorry, I'll wait for you to finish, and I want to add
No,
some more to it. Go ahead.
no, please. No, it's fine.
I think you said it very well. And I play the devil's advocate too, because I have only done one thing my entire life so far, which is
Yeah,
sort of build software.
yeah,
A lot of time for other companies, but for the last many years for our own company. And I ask this question. Sometimes I've talked to developers, Jirka, who are good developers, but sometimes it's not just developers, but it's human nature to become defensive. I've been doing something. It's almost like, I'm going to take a random example. I don't know if you know Yo-Yo Ma. Do you know the cellist Yo-Yo Ma?
No, no,
Okay,
no.
so he's one of the top cellists in the world, right? Yo-Yo Ma. So I'm taking a random example because I love music, but I have zero skills in many other
Okay.
aspects, but music is one of them. So I have huge respect for musicians as much as I do for artists, people who can draw, because those are things I don't know how to do, and I'd love to be able to do that. So if you went to Yo-Yo Ma, hypothetically, a very manufactured example, it may not be even true. You told Yo-Yo Ma, you know what? We don't need you to be playing the cello anymore because a bot can do this. It's very cheap. It can do it all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So why should you be doing this? Right? If you said this, I don't know what his response might be, but somebody who loves music and who actually listens to Yo-Yo Ma, I would be like, oh my God, please, bot, don't do this because you're going to kill the essence of music for me. I want to be able to sort of listen to it with Yo-Yo Ma playing it, not listen to a bot playing it, which I'm sure it can do it for what it's worth. I don't know if that example translates natively to development, but I took that a preposterous different example to come back to what you were saying earlier. When people tell me bots can generate this, sure it can, and it should, because as good developers, we've always relied on tools to do a lot of things that we
Mhm.
cannot do, or where the tools can do it better, and we've augmented that with what we bring to the table. Now, if you were a developer who was always in denial and tried to reinvent the wheel every single time, then I don't know. That was a different problem to begin with. You should not have been doing that all along. So I
Yeah,
don't see AI as bringing that nuance necessarily. As a good developer, you always had to be aware of how things were done, who can be doing it better and faster. Should you be writing code that you should not be writing and only do what you needed to do? Now, with AI in the picture, it just becomes a bit more profound, not dramatically different, if you will. A bot can write more code much faster and solve much more complex problems. But if I were a good engineer, I will be able to embrace AI just like I've been able to embrace everything else along over these
yeah,
years.
yeah,
But
yeah.
after this bot generates the code, I've seen this. I was, working on an endpoint not too long ago. And I was like, you know what? We write a lot of APIs, we create a lot of these endpoints. Let's pretend that we don't have to do this anymore. Let's say I want AI to generate this API for me. So I wrote this problem domain and I try to be a prompt engineer, tried to not write any line of code intentionally, pretended like I didn't know how to write code, gave the problem repeatedly to this tool to have it generate this code. Now, did it generate code? Sure, it did. It generated a bunch of different snippets of code, but again, I played the role of a non developer. So I don't know how to put it together, right? I don't understand code. I had the bot generated. I'm like, Krish, go put this code together, make sure it works, make sure it does its job as it's supposed to do its job, make sure it satisfies all of the requirements, that it's clean, it's secure, it's maintainable, manageable, scalable, performant, yada, 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 and it needs to be deployed to production. For the life of me, Yerka, removing the developer in me, I could not get that to work. I had to have the developer in
Mhm,
me assist
mhm.
me to get that to work. So, for my opinion, as of the time of this recording, is no different from yours. Correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yeah,
A bot can do the job, but what made a good developer from day one, from the days of Cunningham and Ritchie, right? The C book, and these geniuses who lived are not with us anymore, is not how much code you wrote or how fast you wrote it. I think it is how good a problem solver you were. Were you able to take a problem in plain simple English or Czech or any other language and create code that made the most sense to solving that problem in the context of the tools that were available at that point of time? To me, that's what separated a good developer from a not so good developer. Do I pick Python? Do I pick Golang? Do I pick Ruby? Do I pick Java? Sometimes these languages don't make a difference. Other times they do make a difference, because if I'm working in a team that is only doing Golang work and I can do this better using Python, and I found a code generator that created code in Python, I don't think that's the best way to solve the problem, because now the team that did not need to know Python has to understand Python to manage the code that I wrote. And I generated this code in Python for no good reason, because I found a generator that did it better in Python than in Golang. There I have to be a human. I have to figure out, hey, Yurka's team does a couple of different languages as a client, and it makes the most sense for me to create this code in that language so they can maintain this much like they maintain the rest of their code base. So there's a lot of human subjectivity that comes into play, which I think sometimes doesn't get enough credit. At least that's the way I see it. It's not just the raw lines of code. I know I've been talking a while there. I mean, does some of this make sense? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. The thing, the future of software development, I always need to put time stamp on the things I'm saying, because I think like the next step and the reason why you see so many layoffs is that the companies are realizing they don't need, so like you don't need 2,000 developers to write Microsoft Teams. It's nonsense. Uh,
You don't
so
even need Microsoft Teams, but that's a different story.
yeah, that's a different story. Uh, so the big companies are doing these layoffs, but so many new positions will be created, because with the AI you can do the products which was not we were not able to do before. So that's like I'm not worried that the programmers will struggle to find a new job like in 1 year or two.
You're not? I'm worried.
No, 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 no. I really like the idea. Like we have so many ideas what we can do right now with these LLMs. But you still need a programmer to do that.
To even
And
understand it, just to add to what you're saying there, I think you make some great points. I'm going to let you finish. Please go ahead. Yeah.
uh, uh, and in to maintain some not hardcore software, you could use builders. The person who just don't understand the code and he's just doing some internal tool which is just saving some data to DB and then retrieving the data from the DB and showcasing them to the end customer. It's so elementary that you can do it with Cursor without any like huge issue. And if there'll ever be a time where you won't need a programmer to write a code, oh man, we'll be in big trouble. Because imagine that you can't code, and you just write a prompt, create me a Google. And if what you are saying is true, the Cursor or whatever tool will write you the same software as Google has right now. And you probably won't need a company if the tool will be so powerful to do it. You won't need.
I know. Let me
Yeah,
add to what you're saying there, right? Let me give you an example. There's many points that we talked here, and I have a couple of more
yeah,
things to ask you before we wrap this up. But on one side, we talk about all the advancements. We talk about new ways of building software. We talk about skills that we may or may not have had in the past that we need to acquire as engineers, as non-engineers. There's a number of things that are happening, and the world is moving at a pace that we've never seen before.
definitely.
That's a given.
Yeah.
At the same time, I will tell you that I live 20, 30 miles west of Washington, D.C., right? I mean, this is not a particularly a great hub for startups. We are one of them, but there's not that many. Hopefully in the future we have a lot more. But there's a lot of software work that happens in the area because the government is here, right? There's a lot of
Mhm.
money and a lot of work that happens in the area. In other parts of the country, California is one you mentioned, but there's a lot of other parts like in Texas, in Boston. There's many parts of the US where this great software is actually being built as we speak. So that's just for context. But I was there at a nursery a week ago. It's summertime almost here. I was just buying some plants, taking care of our yard and whatnot. They are a private company. They're a private nursery, and we shop at that nursery. And as if you're a restaurateur who knows food, Anywhere you go, you're probably looking at it from the perspective of a restaurateur. But if you're an engineer, anywhere you go, every problem comes across to you as an engineering problem because you are an engineer at the core of you. So I was seeing them use this piece of software. They were using that last year. They were using that 2 years ago. They were using that 5 years ago. And they've been using that since I've been shopping at that particular store. It is not something that could have been built in the last 5 years. I reckon it was built, I don't know, 10 years ago by somebody who actually used tools from 20 years ago to possibly build it. So you can imagine it's pretty dated. But that's all they've been using. And they have a bunch of uh, Gen Z part timers who work at that store. So we have a conversation about engineering and software with everybody we can. And I learned that it takes them a fair bit of time to learn that tool because the tool is very dated. Now, I give you this very specific
Mm.
example, but not a
Yeah.
manufactured example, because I then looked up the company that does it to see if we could work with them to improve their software. Because, we don't, we are a product company, but we also do some managed services work to keep our lights on, if you will. I looked up the company. They are selling plants and trees. But in America, the beauty is here. It could be true in Czech Republic. I say America because I've lived here most of my life. Do not discount any business because there's money in everything that you look at. It's not even a joke. We run
Yeah.
into a problem, we go somewhere. I tell my son, let's look up how much money is spent on this per year. You're going to be baffled. It was Mother's Day 2 days ago. Or was it yesterday? No,
Yes.
2 days ago on Sunday.
2 weeks ago. Yeah.
So I looked up the average spend. Do you want to take a wild guess how much the Mother's Day economy is in the US? Just pick a number, if you will.
Like, I don't know. It will be in billions, I think.
For one day, right? Mother's Day is, you're just buying some flowers, you're taking your mother to dinner and whatnot. You do I reckon you do a few things like that.
Yeah.
The spend for Mother's Day, which is what, 11th of May, the second Sunday of the month of May, right? I think in 2025, if I remember the number correctly, it was $36 billion. 36 billion US dollars.
It's crazy.
And this is true for anything that happens here, which is why I say America is beautiful because there's money everywhere. You just have to find where you want to be and make the most of it. So I looked up this nursery. It's a very family run nursery, right? It's not public, it's a small nursery. It's very specific to this part of the world. And I looked up their annual revenue. I had a number in mind, and I was not way off. I think it's about 100 to 110 million dollars. And this is not a public organization; it's a private company. It's
Yeah.
probably 20 people running it. They're running the software from like 10 years ago. And the reason I give this big story before I get to the point is, one is, I'm not brevity is not my forte, so it always takes me a lot more words than it should take. That's one reason. But the other reason is I want to give you good context to the problem, and folks are watching and listening as well. We talked AI, we talked cursor, we talked LLMs, we talked a number of things, automation, generated code, the future. Here I'm looking at a company that's selling flowers and plants and bushes, 110 million dollars annual revenue. The software was probably written ten years ago. It probably feels like it was written 30 years ago. So it's important important to recognize not every piece of software that's being written today. And tell me if you agree or disagree, by the way. Not every piece of software that's being written, it's written the way it's written at Meta or Microsoft or Google or Nvidia. It's simply not true.
Mm-hmm.
The disparity between companies is quite dramatic. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you can either build software that helps developers at Nvidia, or I can build software that helps this nursery that's selling flowers and plants and doing $110 million worth of revenue. Now, you tell me what you think, Yerka. For somebody who's watching or listening to this, should the future be only complicated software, complicated tools addressed to complicated engineers building amazingly complicated stuff? Or is there enough money to solving simple problems using these tools and helping people who are not particularly that versatile in AI tools? I know I said a number of words, a number of sentences.
Mm.
Tell me if I convey the crux of what I'm trying to say there.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I want to start with a comparison between Microsoft and other companies. If your main product is software, you're really focusing on the software to be really, really good. But if you are selling insurance, you're not focused as much on the software. I met so many insurance companies, which I think are really, really bad at software, which are telling me, oh, we are doing this for 20 years as a software developer, the same way in Fortran, and it works perfectly. And they are able to tell you this in 2024, that Fortran for them is the main and primary language they are developing the insurance company. So that's like the huge difference
You
between
don't like
like the.
Fortran?
I'm.
I'm just kidding. I'm just
I'm
messing with you. I'm messing with you there. Sorry,
it's
go
like they
ahead.
are not evolving. They are not evolving with the current trends, and they will struggle in the future, probably, or maybe not. Uh, but companies like Meta or Facebook or every company which has more than 10 years struggle with maintaining old code, because like these thousands and thousands of developers created like code 10 years ago in technology which is not relevant today, and somebody has to maintain the code, but nobody wants to. you,
So in
you
other
know
words, there's two parts to it, right? One is making smart engineers working at great companies better at writing code. The other side of it is helping more people write code. They are distinct problems. Agreed?
yeah, because like right now more and more and more and more code will be generated, and somebody have to maintain the code. And i I hope I won't live in a future where there will be no programmers necessary to create a software company.
Not
You
more.
know,
The way I see it, here's how I see it. When I talk to developers, people who are good developers who sometimes are in denial, thinking that AI is not coming after their jobs, I'm sorry. And I think
yeah,
that is
it
happening and we're
will.
seeing it happen.
Yeah.
But here's what I want to ask you. And I actually want to ask you in a different context, but this is not a bad context too. So let's say, over the years, so as somebody who's living here on the East Coast of the US, it doesn't really matter, but I'm just speaking to it for somebody living on this side of the coast for what it's worth. I've worked with companies all over the country, right? A lot of people I've worked with happen to be in Seattle and state of Washington and in California, but I've worked a fair bit with companies on the East Coast as well, just because I live on the
Yeah.
East Coast. In this context, Jirka, I've kind of collaborated with developers from other parts of the world. If it's Europe, mostly England. I've worked with folks in England over the years. Czech Republic not too long ago. Again, amazing developers, and some other countries in Europe as well. And then South America, like not many, but with folks in Peru, some in Colombia. So there's a development community, in South America as well, sort of nearshoring to us. And then India has tons of developers. Probably has the most number. I don't know, maybe China and India. So there's a lot of development happening in that part of the world. So you mentioned presentation at the top of this call. So I want to kind of circle back to that and talk about culture, because that plays a role too. You know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, 10, 15 years ago, when we built software in the US, when we want to make it in a more affordable manner, we were looking to countries where it was relatively cheaper to build software. So India was certainly, one of those countries where you have amazing engineers, and they're incredibly affordable as well. So it was a beautiful combination. But as years went by, developers became more expensive in India, at least the good developers. You know what I mean? You can always find a
Yeah.
developer.
Yeah.
I'm only
Yeah.
talking about the good developers, just to be very clear. So you do a due diligence. Hey, where did they go to school? Not that it matters, but sometimes it does. What kind of work have they done and whatnot? Because I've worked with developers who are amazingly brilliant and others not so brilliant as well. Just the way the world works. So it was always challenging to find good people in countries that you did not necessarily understand, because it was very difficult. I've had people call me saying, hey, you know what? I went and hired a bunch of people in some part of India and I've kind of lost money on that because it turned out to be not the best team to hire. And I was like, yeah, of course. Every place has good people, not so good people, and terrible people. You just have to be able to find
Yeah.
who makes the most sense to you.
Yeah.
The reason I give this context, Jirka, is outsourcing was an option, meaning whether you outsource to South America or to some part of Eastern Europe, to Ukraine. I've worked with brilliant, brilliant developers in Ukraine, or to India, for instance. But as AI comes into picture, here's my question to you. I want to get your take on this. The need to actually outsource is actually diminished because if I wanted 10 people to get something done, and I had 3 people in the US and 7 people in some other part of the world because they were more affordable to me, I now need maybe 4 people, like bots and people put together to get something done. So I would rather have 2 incredibly senior people in the US, have 2 bots assist them, and not have anybody anywhere else in the world at all to get software done. So does this, first of all, I want to get your thoughts on it. Do you agree, disagree? And does this change, if you do agree or disagree, does this not change the whole dynamic of building software remotely? I want to get your thoughts on this.
Uh, okay, so let me get this straight. So developers will be part of a software company for sure. I'm not sure about their salaries because you can also hire really cool and senior developers for India to do the same job. I don't know. But what I do know is we also created a salary map just to make it fun. Can you see? Can I share
Yeah,
also?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I can see. Yep,
So
go ahead.
so so for example, this is a salary map for PHP developers, which you can see like the skills of the developer on the right side.
Any way you can make it bigger, like do a zoom into it, Dirka.
Yeah,
Perfect,
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
You
Yeah.
can zoom it, and this is specific for this seniority. And here you can see like the prices in Europe
No, can you
or
actually? You know
in
what? This is very interesting. Can you go back to the US and I want to see it? I want to zoom in because I cannot see the text specifically. We can pick New York.
yeah,
What are we looking for?
yeah,
What is this
yeah.
person doing? Is it a
And
developer?
yeah, it's a software developer, it's a PHP developer, and you will see
No,
like
that seems awfully low. Is that a monthly salary, not an annual
yeah,
salary,
it's a
right?
monthly
Okay.
salary.
Okay,
Sorry, it's a
okay. I was
monthly
like, okay, you
salary.
know what?
So
That's okay. So okay, it's
no,
ten
no.
thousand euros, right? So New York is 10,000 euros,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
what, like, is it like 13,000? I'm gonna talk in US dollars just so I understand and a lot of the people watching this understand. Well, I don't know what the conversion is. I'm gonna
yeah.
assume it's like thirteen
Oh,
thousand
you know
US
what?
dollars.
I can I'm not logged in, but I think I can change it to dollars. Uh,
Oh, awesome. That'll be perfect. Yeah, all the way at the bottom, I see US
yeah,
dollars there.
yeah.
Yep.
I can go back.
Lovely. Can you zoom in? I think New York is like $11,000, something like that, correct?
Yeah, and but the trick is this is for specific developer who has only 5 years of experience and he has these skills.
Yeah, no,
So
actually,
even
Erica, let's dig into it. But I'm going to give context to for the folks
yeah,
who actually are watching this.
yeah,
We talk typically in annual salary. I know
I
in
know.
some parts of the world, so I want to convert that, multiply it so it gives context to people. So I think it's $11,600 is like what, 121,000, another 6,000, about $127,000 a year. Let's go with an even number.
Yeah,
$125,000 in New York City is what, for whatever this job is, the job doesn't matter. The salary is $125,000. Can we go to the West Coast and see what that number looks like? Can we just go to the West Coast of the US?
yeah, it's similar. Like the US mostly are like really close with the PHP because this is like it's funny when you are changing the languages. It's change also
No,
the
no, that's
salary.
fine. And let's go to
Yeah.
Kansas too. Kansas is, I'm going to be more affordable. So let's pick Kansas City there. I think I saw Kansas if you zoom in. Yeah, it's $7,800, right? That's $96,000 in Kansas City. So
Yeah.
it's about a 25% variation between, say, Midwest or Central America and the East Coast, right? $125,000. Now
Yeah.
let's look at Europe. Can you zoom into Europe?
Yeah, I can check the same seniority in Prague where I from.
Oh, but before we go to Prague, I'm curious to go to a country that I actually worked with more
Okay.
closely, London. Can you go to London? I want to see what
Yeah.
London is. Oh, it's $8,000. That's similar to Kansas City in our example. It's about $100,000 a year.
Yeah, but
Got
but
it.
you can
Now you
see
can.
it also can go up. You
Yeah, no,
know?
I'm just going to go with the number that's
Yeah,
on the map there
yeah,
to assume
yeah,
ceteris paribus
yeah,
conditions. Now
yeah,
let's go to Prague.
yeah,
Wow, $4,000, right? So
yeah,
that's half, less than half. I would say 48,000, half,
yeah,
about half. So for
yeah,
50% off the cost of Kansas City or London, you can find a developer
yeah,
in Prague. And
yeah,
I can vouch based on my experience. There is absolutely, if you took good developers in all of the cities that we've taken so far, London, Seattle, or the West Coast, East Coast, and Prague, people, there is absolutely no difference. There is like no difference at all because I've worked with people, developers in all of these cities. There is no difference. Okay, now you've gotten 4,000. I'm
yeah.
curious. Let's go. I don't know. Let's go further east. Can you go further east on your map?
We
Like,
don't have that much data for India uh, because the salaries you see are generated from job posts and the amount of
okay.
money like companies are offering in job posts, and because there's like thousands and thousands of them over a time, uh, these data are created on those, but we are not collecting them in.
Oh, but you have Beijing. Let's go to China. You
I'm
got
not
something.
sure about the accuracy of Beijing, but no, no, no. Let's not go there. Uh,
Okay. Okay. So let's just. So you don't have
so
any in Asia. Go
the,
ahead. Continue.
the reason why I'm saying this is there's like a huge gap in salaries between US and the rest of the world.
Well, I would say
So
US. I would say US, Western Europe, and rest of the world, right? Because I think
yeah,
I know London showed cheaper, but it was comparable to Kansas as well, right? So I would say they are kind of along the same lines.
yeah, yeah. So imagine that with a cursor, even the developer from I don't know Turkey or India could be really good. And how to spot that he is good when you are interviewing him? That's one of the issues we are trying to solve with the performance reviews.
But before you go there, Yurka, I think I want you, if you could answer my question
Yeah,
there or get your thoughts on it, which is before, historically, you needed to find more affordable developers and resources in other parts of the world because it was more expensive to build all of it locally here. If
yeah.
I sat in Seattle, it cost me more money. In the Bay Area, more money. I go to Austin a little bit cheaper, but it is still expensive enough. But my question to you is with AI and with the assistance of AI tools, do I have the need to find people outside the country, or is my need to find people outside the country diminished compared to 2 years ago, 5 years ago?
Like it depends on the reason why are you outsourcing. Because sometimes we are broadening the search and we are okay to hire like full remote developers for whatever country, not because of money, but because of seniority. That
Um,
if you really want to hire like top talents, you need to do like hundreds of interviews to hire one, and you don't care if he's from London or from Beijing.
no, but it is the money though, right? Tell me, because I mean, I could be wrong, but I've never had a scenario where I could not find somebody with the skill we were looking for in the US. It's just that a lot of times you cannot afford to hire the
Oh,
people with that skill in the US. It's not like at least I'm not like, in my experience, I could be wrong, where I'm like looking for a certain kind of help and I'm like, oh, you know what? Nobody in the US knows this. We have to go outside the country to find this help. That's not generally the case. I mean, would you agree?
yeah, like definitely if you find like a top talent in US and he's working for OpenAI and he's earning like $1 million per year, yeah,
No, I don't
uh,
need I don't need somebody working for OpenAI, to be honest. What I mean
yeah,
is, if I want a good engineer, I'm saying we have good engineers in the US too, much like Prague, much like Bangalore, much like
yeah,
London. It's not
definitely,
like
yeah,
America
yeah,
doesn't have the best developers in the world
yeah.
as well. The point was we had to go outside to be able to make it more affordable because the cost of living in Seattle, I live in the metro, Washington DC metro, and it's not cheap, but it's a lot cheaper than Seattle. So people in Seattle are going to be more expensive simply because they have to pay more for rent and housing and whatnot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm not sure, because I like to work with the developers on site in private office and to have like the cool culture of a team and enjoying to working with them and basically make friends out of the people I'm working with. And I really enjoy that. Uh, but sometimes if there is like a different company which are not like the priorities of the company or like the main goals are not based on like one location or the company is like global. I understand where the company could be okay to hire for remote developers from India. So I don't know basically. I
In
could
other
imagine
words,
like both
can we then
scenarios happening.
say, makes sense? Can we then say, Yerka, that the need for outsourcing may or may not change with AI is what we are saying. In other words,
Yeah,
5 years ago, we needed to
yeah,
outsource for some other reason to save
yeah,
money, plus maybe other reasons too. Now, the reasons are still valid because if I can write more code using bots and I can hire a good engineer in Prague and Bangalore who's more affordable, the point is, why should I hire that engineer in Seattle is what we are saying.
yeah. And I want to add like one more thing to make it more clear. Like with the senior developers, I think like that's what will happen as we mentioned. But the thing is, the builders, the staff who are only using these AI tools and don't understand what they are writing, and that's like completely different thing. Um, because they will be probably cheaper, and I understand why. What I maybe agree with what you are saying, that you don't need to overpay. Like you're okay to pay the person like the same amount of money as a senior developer in Prague, but you would pay the same amount of money to a person in US because he will be cheaper.
Or what I'm saying is, in other words, I think this is, there's no answer, but I'm just throwing this out because this is what companies are going through right now. Hey, you know what? I need to sort of replace some of my engineers with bots, which is happening as we speak. And then the question becomes, even the engineers that do remain, where are they going to be? Because I know I've actually, it's funny in a way that, Jirka, I was working for a client at some point a while ago where their team was entirely based out of Seattle. The product was built
Yeah,
in Seattle, mostly in Seattle. And then they had a team in Prague at the time and a team in Bangalore. I was consulting at the time for the project. They were like, you know what? We've trained the folks in Prague and in Bangalore well enough. So we're going to cut down on the people in Seattle and in other parts of the US. I was working remotely from the West Coast. And I moved on to doing other things at that point. Few months down the road, I saw in the news that they had moved their entire team to Prague and Bangalore. It is not hypothetical, that's literally what
yeah,
happened. Now,
yeah.
that's a little bit prior to perhaps the complete advent of AI, but I think it's easy enough to see that with AI, that's going to continue to happen. So, a couple of more things to you, and then I'll let you ask me anything and we can call this wraps. As we see more AI work happening, whether it's tools, people, and whatnot, are you seeing AI skills be more prominent in some parts of the world than other, or do you not? If you were to, do you see anything like that, or what is your experience?
Yeah, I don't have the data to respond to that because like few months ago these tools were not as powerful as they are right now, and I'm working with like Cursor for last 7 months, and the change in the Cursor is like significant every month. So I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is what I want to show you is this review. This is a review of a developer done. It's done from his public contribution on GitHub.
Okay. Can you zoom
So
in a
and this
little
is
bit, Yurka, so I can see
zoom in.
the, yep, font is,
Okay. Uh,
or just do Apple plus plus or something. I just want to see it so it's a little bit clearer. If you can, otherwise it's all right. You can continue. Yeah.
oh, sorry. I
Perfect.
was
Yeah, that is good.
I was zooming the wrong window.
Okay, no worries. Can you go a couple of more zooms?
Yes, yes, I can.
Perfect. That's good. Yep. Sorry,
Yeah.
continue. Yep.
Basically, when you are when you want to hire full remote developer and your only requirement is that he knows how to code and know how to speak English a little bit, you struggle to select the good ones. So we use the same performance measurement, not on your internal people, but to the people who you're trying to hire. So they can give you like their code, and this is the evaluation of their
Oh,
previous
I see
work
what you mean. So
or
essentially, you point to the public repos on, say, GitHub, and you're able to pick up and sort of draw a pattern and come up with an analysis, and you're showcasing it here.
or with their approval, they can give you the access to their private repositories.
And then okay,
Yeah.
perfect. That makes, and then you
And
kind of tell what they have been working on and whatnot, for instance.
yeah, and this is like I can give you like this is like the positions we notice that the code is written for and how good he is on that position or how senior he is. This is the technologies we notice he use and how good he is with it, how good he is with the technology. This is some
Okay,
his
let me ask
weak.
you this. This is also interesting. So
Yeah,
before we go, I can ask you, and again, I'm asking you this. I'm sort of playing the devil's advocate, as you probably gathered along the way. So I'm sort of
yeah,
playing not just my,
yeah,
even if I agree with something, I'm trying to intentionally disagree just so other
yeah,
people can see multiple
yeah,
perspectives as well, right?
yeah,
Just so you know. So
yeah,
when I'm looking at this as somebody, I'm like, you know what? Sorry, who was that person? Was it Adam? Doesn't matter, but I'm
Adam,
just going
yeah,
to
yeah,
Adam,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
Adam's got a bunch of skills. He's a front end developer, and you said meteor. Is it mid-level
like
engineer?
mid. Yeah,
Mid-level
he's
engineer,
like
right? Okay, got
mid-level
it.
engineer. Yeah.
Okay, now here are my questions. I have two specific questions about this. Now, when I look at this as a developer, as somebody who's done this a while, here are some questions that pop in my head. Hey, Adam's a good front-end developer because the rating is 4.6 good or average. Well, however you see 4.6 out of 10. I'm an average student, so 4.6 is good for me, right? You know what I mean? If you're a better
Yeah.
student, you might need a 9 or Sheldon. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know if you watch Big Bang Theory, it's one of the famous
I
shows.
did.
If you're
I
Sheldon,
did.
it's probably you need a 10 out of 10. I've been watching Young Sheldon lately, and it's amazing, actually. Yeah. Okay, now my question is, a front end developer, 4.6, that's fine. Let's say I'm all right with the number, but that's too generic for me. Somebody who's a good or a decent front end developer using React and Redux is different from a good front end developer who's building it, I don't know, using Angular or any other, or Flutter, for instance. That's one question. So just because somebody is a 4.6 out of 10 and is a front end developer, I can go to the tech stack and sort of tie them together. But to me, I need something that ties them together already, as opposed to it being separate from there.
Yeah.
The strong and weak skills. Second part of my question, Jirka, is problem solving. Now, problem solving is one of the most generic combination of words you can put together in the English language, if you will. So
Mhm.
telling me that somebody's 9 out of 10 in problem solving, what does it mean? Are they good in problem solving the architecture of a mobile app, architecture of a web app, or are they able to solve AI related problems faster? Or are they able to solve, I don't know, human problems in a team better? You know what I mean? So even though the question, I intentionally made it very specific, my question really to you is, a lot of these tools that analyze things and put numbers and put them on diagrams and charts sort of give you an idea, but I don't know if I can ever hire somebody without doing everything else I would have anyways done. Having the first interview, talking to them, asking them the questions the way I want to ask those questions, making my own human judgment about them. So I want to kind of get your thoughts on how
You
close
have
are
to.
these tools to helping me make the decision.
Yeah. Now you have to do the interview. You have to talk with the person. This tool is before the first round of the interview, when you have few hundreds of applicants and you want to somehow measure them to pick like the 10 developers who you want to talk. and you don't want to give them like crazy homeworks because they are not able to spend 9 hours with every company or do some like random generic tests. This is like long-term contribution from the real code the developer actually write, and it can give you like a clear overview on how good or bad he's doing, and you can then decide if you want to spend 1 hour talking with the guy
Okay,
and
perfect. Right.
asking
So
him the real questions.
and that makes sense, which is true of a lot of these tools that I've seen where you see it and then you make the most sense out of it. Because sometimes if you've done this a while, it takes, if I interviewed with you, Yerkat, in 5 minutes down the road, you'll be able to tell if Krish is just talking the talk or can he walk the walk as well. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? It's not,
yeah,
it's very difficult to hide, but it depends on the person, the skills of the interviewer as well. Because
yeah,
sometimes people get away with it. But the one thing I want to ask is, the one thing, if you scroll up to the top, the thing I saw missing, and the thing I think to me is important because it's one of the most
yeah.
difficult things to judge is the credibility of the engineer. How do I tell? Okay, I point to a bunch of public repos, and I cannot tell you the number of times you read about stories where people are not so credible. It's easier to find a better developer than a credible developer, in my opinion. People do all kinds of things that are unfathomable. Then you spot them in the interview, like, oh my God, are you the one answering the questions? Are you looking at a bot? Is the bot helping you in answering these questions? Even with or without this tool, Yerka, because it's something people would want to know watching this podcast. What would you recommend as a good way to test someone's credibility? Because that's very, very hard to tell in the day and age that we're living in these days. People are looking at ChatGPT's answers and reciting that onto the screen. How do you tell if somebody is credible?
Like how I do it because I went to like hundreds, maybe thousands of interviews, and because I saw the credible developers, I kind of have the feeling that he is. And I don't know how to measure it or describe it. I can tell it by his general answers or general questions because I know what how credible developer looks like, and I struggle to put this in a words how
And
to
and and
spot
and just to
the
and
good
just to be
one.
clear, so people are not confused. When you say looks like, you mean not looks like
Yeah,
physically, right?
yeah,
That
yeah,
like
yeah,
with
yeah.
technically and so on and so forth.
Yes,
Just
yes,
to be
yes,
clear. Yep.
yeah.
That. So in other words, Yurka, no matter how many tools we have to have this is a great example, by the way. Much like AI and much like you said, developers are still needed because bots can generate code, but to put that together in a meaningful way to make sure it's secure, it's clean, it's maintainable, scalable, and deployable, you need a human input. You may not need as many humans as you may have needed in the past, but you do need humans to some extent, perhaps to a large extent, in the foreseeable future.
Like yeah, yeah, definitely. And I can give you like one of the ways how this tool is used, like the one I'm showing you right now, is for AI agents who are looking for the people to hire. Because you want to hire front-end developer. Okay, use the AI to find you the correct person. The AI will find hundreds of developers on LinkedIn or whatever site, and then the tool will reach them out, and like 100 people will want to work for you. You don't want to do 100 interviews. Oh, okay, you can do an AI interview. But there's an issue with AI interview that is only evaluating the developer based on few questions. And this is like a different approach to this. And the approach is, here is the real code what the developer write across long period of time. And you can use this to evaluate if he's a good match to you or not.
Makes sense. Cool. So we're coming to sort of the tail end. This has been a phenomenally interesting conversation. Different perspectives, two people from different parts of the world. Even though we are engineers at heart, our experience tends to be unique, regardless. Uh, I have a non-technical. Yeah, yeah. You can stop sharing if you want, so I can see more of you.
Yeah.
So I have a few questions to wrap this up. But before I do that, I know I've been throwing questions at you. It's always easy to ask questions. It's more difficult to answer them. So here is the opportunity for you to ask me if you have any questions in your mind that you've been wanting to ask. I'm more than happy to answer them. It doesn't have it can be anything that you want to ask.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think is the future of software development in the horizon like 3 years?
Great question. Only thing I might change, if you will, if it's all right, is
Yeah.
I'm going to say 6 months, because 3 years is too long to predict, as you and I both know.
Yeah.
I always say that JavaScript frameworks changed every 3 weeks, and that was painful enough. So I preferred doing back end work because things don't change that frequently. I think AI is changing more frequently than JavaScript frameworks changed over
Yes,
the years, right?
definitely.
So I'm going to
Yeah.
try and answer your question, but I'm going to just make it 6 months, if that's all right.
Okay.
I heard the Anthropic founder, one of the founders, I heard, watched the speech not too long ago, where he said that in the next 6 to 9 months, 90% of work that they are doing, and again, if memory serves me right from what I heard, would actually be done by AI. 90% in the next 6 to 9 months. Mark Zuckerberg said that mid-level engineers at Meta may not even exist anymore. There's only going to be senior engineers. And my question, again, I'm going to complete this, and I'm going to come back to
Mm.
my questions and concerns. And then I told you the story with Mark asking Satya as to how much of code at Microsoft was written by AI. So having those three pieces of information, I can tell you that I went to a World Economy Summit 2 weeks ago in Washington, D.C. About 200 CEOs from Fortune 500 companies were there talking for 20 minutes. I went there for like 3 days. It was extremely interesting. I heard the CEO of, say, Uber, I forget his name, my apologies, talk about what's happening at Uber. I think it was CRX, one of the freight companies. Then the CEO of Snowflake. You mentioned a number of people that you're excited to watch and learn from. They were there pretty much. It was super exciting. All of the conversations were around two items. One that we've not talked about in this call, and probably doesn't matter to us, at least the two of us as software engineers maybe, was tariffs. There was a lot of talk about tariffs, which things have changed yesterday,
Yeah.
so maybe that's not even a topic anymore.
Yeah.
And the second thing they were asked about was AI and the impact of AI and what it means to them. One of the things that I can share with you and the audience here, Jirka, is the question to a lot of the people was, are you realizing the value of your investments? Are you getting returns? Are you seeing the return on your investment? Because, a lot of times these companies are spending a lot of money on AI and AI tools. The CapEx spend keeps increasing. Like Meta is spending $100 billion, or Microsoft spending $100 billion. They are large hyperscalers who can spend $100 billion, but most other companies cannot. But they're spending $1 billion, $2 billion, or $500 million, or $40 million. And are they beginning to see returns? 6 months ago, I've been to conferences. The answer was not exactly. 1 year ago, the answer was not at all. But this time, I can tell you, a lot of them said they're beginning to see returns on their investment. 40% returns on investment, 30% returns on investment, which means for everybody, all the naysayers who did not believe in AI and were in denial, this was a stark reality. Companies are not only
Mhm.
investing, they are starting to realize revenue come out of those investments. Sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, yeah. Like I heard like a really interesting thought about what you're saying, and it was like, okay, so if one developer is able to create me like this really cool product that I can sell for this amount of money, and because he's using really cool tools, I'm receiving like huge returns on the investment in his salary. I should hire more developers and build more tools that I can sell. And this was like really eye-opening to me, because right now, because of the low performance of a developer is really expensive. But if two developers can create me two cool products that I can sell, I want to hire the third and the fifth one or the 10th one and have 10 products that I can sell.
Makes complete sense, which means, just to add and extrapolate what you're saying there, the need for good problem solvers. I'm not even going to say developers, because to me, the way I see the future, Yerka, is when I graduated from college 20 years ago and found my first job and then my second job, the way I interviewed and I learned and prepared was very different from how I believe somebody's going to have to do today. I think the
Yeah.
notion of a developer, the definition of a developer is going to change quite a bit, because I think in future, in the next 3 to 6 to 9 months, a product manager who was a good product manager, a technical product manager, was not writing code but was working with developers, is now going to become a developer. So you're going to have a team. In my mind, the composition of that team is going to change. If you had a team with one product manager, three developers, one tester, I don't know, whoever else makes up that team, that composition is going to be quite different. Now you're going to have one or two less developers. You're going to have a product manager who's also able to contribute to the code base in some way, form, or shape. And maybe you have a DevOps or a DevSecOps engineer who is also able to contribute to the development of the features, because now you become cross domain. You're not very domain specific anymore.
Yeah.
You have a good bunch of people who are pretty smart, who are able to contribute to the product development, but not the way they did in the past. You sort of don't have defined, you have a boundary, you have a role, sure, but those boundaries are loosely defined. If Yerka needs some help with UI, Krish is going to help out. If Krish needs some help with technical product management, Yerka is going to help Krish. We're going to be a bunch of people who coexist in a team with specific skills. Sure, we have our own domain specific skills. I'm not saying no, but I'm saying the boundaries in my mind are going to be much lesser, stricter, much less strictly defined, because all of us are going to be using a bunch of tools to make ourselves more productive. And those tools are going to bridge the gap between a product manager, between I don't see in future, do I see somebody being a full-time tester? I don't think so. I mean, I never saw that even in the past, to be honest with you. We've always had people who are contributing the code base and helping us with testing. I've worked with companies who've had dedicated testers. I have my own opinions about that, right or
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
future, I see that there's going to be a dramatic difference in the composition of the teams. And the second thing is, the nature of outsourcing is going to change quite a bit. In the past, we had money, we built some in the US locally, and then we wanted to find people outside the US because we want to save some money, to be very honest with you. That need is still going to be there, but when I go to Prague, when I go to Bangalore, or when I go to some other part, when I go to Peru to find that help, the type of help I'm looking for is going to be quite different from the type of help I look for in the past. I might need an engineer or developer, sure, but the type of skill that that developer needs to bring to the table is going to be a little bit different. And here is what I mean by that, and tell me what you think. 3 years ago, I could have gone to, I don't know, some remote part of India, found a brilliant developer who barely spoke any English, and I would have been completely all right with that. To some extent, for me, it becomes challenging because I don't speak other Indian languages, for instance. So if you don't speak English, or India has like 30 different languages which are completely different from each
Mm.
other. So English is the only way we kind of communicate with each other. So if they didn't speak that, I'm not an expert in anything for that matter, let alone English, but at least I have conversational abilities, if you will. Sometimes we could make the compromise and say, hey, somebody is a phenomenally great Golang developer. They have certain challenges in this language of English, but I can do away with that. But in future, it's my opinion that some of those soft skills are going to become more important, because I need that person to understand the problem better. I need them to be able to find the best AI tools to work with. I mean, to solve the problem. So I'm comfortable having the conversation with them. I'm comfortable delegating some of the work to them. Now, someone might be thinking, listening to this, Krish, are you saying that English or communication was not important in the past? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it might become a little bit more important in future, because you're working with bots and few humans, and the few humans you work with, you better you should be in a position to understand at least those few humans, So communication actually does not become less important, it becomes more important, because I don't want to be in a position where I go to upwork.com, find that somebody's doing it for like 15 or $20 an hour, and I'm like, my eyes light up and I'm like, this is incredibly cheap, I cannot find anybody for $20 an hour in the US. And I hire somebody, 6 months go by and nothing gets done, because Yerka, I can now tell you the number of people have called me and told me, Krish, I don't want to go to some of these platforms because I can find engineers really quickly, but I can never get work done because it never gets done, because everybody claims to know everything that ever existed in the world. And then I figure after I hired them that they really don't know what they're talking about, and it's very difficult. And now you have to figure out, okay, am I going to this part of the world or that part of the world, or where does credibility come more easily than some other parts of the world? And I have to become this insanely intelligent manager who can tell the difference between a good developer and a bad developer, good credible developer and a not so credible developer. I mean, do you see what I mean, Yerka?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm basically that's my slight issue with the future is that the person, like a huge amount of people, have to be really good at basically everything in order to work with these tools. And from my experience, people are not that good.
Very true.
And
I couldn't agree more with you. So I think the need for good engineers is not going away, but
no,
whether you need that many people in the field of engineering, I don't think so.
yeah,
Here is the challenge. I asked one of my previous podcast guests, the world population is at 8 billion today. It's going to be about 10 to 11 billion, I believe, by the end of the century or well before that. Some continents are going to grow in population. Some are going to, South Korea, I think the average birth rate has plummeted in Japan and South Korea. The population is growing in some parts of the world. Like I think in Nigeria, the population is going to like double or triple in the next 20 years. So, there is going to be disparity in the growth of population in different parts of the world as well. That brings its own set of challenges too. So we need good engineers, sure, but we perhaps may not need as many engineers. What does it mean then? You have more people, you have more bots, more automation, you need less people to do more that needs to get done. So what's going to happen? It's going to be an interesting time. Less, enough said
you know,
about that, right?
and somebody has to maintain these bots, and it's not an easy thing to do. And
Not only maintain the bots, also to update what we know of today, Yerka. What gets generated is one thing. What can the bot do, or what should the bot do, or how well can it do that? And how much can you afford? If you try to get one of these Amazon machine images, AMIs, on AWS that uses NVIDIA as GPUs, it's incredibly expensive, and it's not going to get any cheaper. There's also this geopolitics that comes into play, which we don't talk about as developers. How much how much exports can they do to other countries? You know what I mean? Like, as we're talking about here, I think our president like is in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi is going to invest a ton of money. I think I saw the news this morning where Saudi is going to build these huge data centers in Riyadh, and they're going to purchase a large number of GPUs from like Nvidia. There's also AI sovereignty. There's a number of different things that we can talk about, but I know we are at the 2 hour mark, so this is amazing. I want to talk more to you about this. Before I wrap this up, I'm going to give you one more chance to ask me anything, and I have one last question to you before I call it wraps. Anything else you feel like you want to ask me?
oh, that's fun.
Okay, the one
That's
question I
really
have to ask,
interesting.
it's amazing. And please, I'm more than happy to have this continue this conversation. And we can dig deeper into each of these facets, right? Talk very specifically as well. The last super non-technical question to you that I ask of all of my podcast guests, Erica, is what is your favorite food? And if it's something that not all of us might understand, you might have to explain it. What's your favorite food?
Food?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm really into Asian cuisine, so the Thai cuisine, like that's my favorite one.
Any
So
dish? Like, what's a specific Thai
just
dish?
few hours ago, I make a pad krapal for dinner.
What did you make, sorry?
A pad krapal, that's the name of the dish.
I'm sure I know it. Can you spell it for me?
Um, it's a normally minced meat with Thai basil and
Okay.
chili and garlic with rice and egg on top of it.
Sounds good. I'm a vegetarian, but I had Thai food 2 days ago in DC. It was very expensive because Thai food in America is extremely expensive. I don't know why it is. I had like veggie drunken noodles, but usually the veggie drunken noodles in the US for the most part comes in as flat noodles.
Yeah.
This one was actually udon drunken noodles. I've never had like udon noodles in a
Okay.
Thai dish prepared this way, so it was actually quite nice as well. This was amazing, folks. Again, I had this chat with Jirka Bachel, who is the CEO of Navigara.com. We saw the products, and I'm going to include links to Navigara. We talked about the platform, the product, the value add that it brings to the table. So certainly do check out. I'm going to include the links. We're going to include the links to the company and to Yerka's LinkedIn profile as well. And if there's other links that you want for us to include, Yerka, we are more than happy to do it. We talked about a number of different things, about AI, the impact of AI, the platform, measuring developer performance, using AI tools, how to build software, how was it built in the past, how we think it might be built in the near to
In the
long term
future.
future, the challenges of outsourcing, the need, maybe some geopolitics, because I'm always interested in geopolitics. So I just threw that in there at the very end. Um, I'm going to let you summarize our session, Yerka, and after you do it, we can call it wraps. But after we are done, just please stay on the call for a couple of seconds for the
Yeah.
upload to complete.
Okay.
So, closing comments, Yerka?
I think we just talk about the things we love and we'll enjoy to talk about.
That's very concise. Any more extended closing comments, if you will?
I'm curious about the future. It's funny how it's changing. Like 3 months ago, I would say something completely different than today. And I'm curious to see what my thought will be like in 6 months.
And I think that's the best way to summarize, and much better than I could have ever done, because the skills could change, the technologies could change, future is unpredictable. That's how life
Yeah.
works. But the one thing that binds us, as I'm not saying as people, that's a more philosophical statement. I don't know if I can speak to that. I can say what binds us as engineers, Yerka, is that word that you use, curiosity, right? We're all curious. We want to know what's going on. We want to step outside our comfort zones. We want to
Mm.
learn what we don't know. We want to accept what we don't know. And we want to improve the skills we do have, learn more skills, and just be constantly challenged, and live a life that we believe is meaningful, at least from a technical standpoint. So
Mm.
that's beautifully summarized. Again,
Yeah.
folks, Jirka Bachel runs a company, a product company based out of Prague, beautiful city, great people. I've worked with folks in Prague and they are phenomenal engineers. So certainly do reach out to Jirka if you need anything. And that is it. We're going to call it wraps. It was 2 hours, but I think I thoroughly enjoyed this. A lot
Me
time,
too.
much more well spent than watching something on Netflix, at least to me.
Yeah,
Thank you,
for me
Jirka.
too. Yeah,
Thanks so
thank you
much.
for your invite.